everybody to our session here. We are the Creative Works session, and so I know this is going to be a session that's going to promise to be very interesting because we have a really neat variety of people and backgrounds, and I'm so excited. I can't wait to start. We are going to have our first presenters are going to be Lindsay Bueller and Jennifer Bates with their piece called Great Firewall. So that's exciting. Followed by Haley Morgan, who is a current student, and her piece is called Do Not Stand at My Grave and Weep. And then we have Madison Stanford, another current student, who's going to share her piece, Know Who You Are. Kim Boehm, a professor emeritus, will be talking to us about Nine Muse Freeze, his work. And then we'll have Clayton Brecht, also a current student, with his Rap Stars Cipher. And last but not least, Leah Kaufman, who is a current student who will be sharing her piece, The Unexpected Gift. So I'm going to go ahead and get us started here. If you have any questions as we go along, please feel free to post them in the chat. We will have time for questions. So that will be available, but if you want to get your question down, we'll be watching for those. And I will post a link to the survey. Lisa had a link to a follow-up survey at the end. You can please take it if you haven't in the first session. You can take it at the end of the day if you're going to be attending any of the other sessions too. It just gives us a little bit idea. So you'll be seeing that come up in the chat as well. But without further ado, I'd like to go ahead and introduce Lindsay Bueller and Jennifer Bates.
Hello, good morning, everyone. I'm going to share my screen and get started. So I'll just confirm that you can see that.
Yes, can see it.
Great. Okay, so I'm going to be presenting along with my colleague, Lindsay Bueller. We're going to present our creative work, Great Firewall. And let me introduce you to the piece. So what is Great Firewall? It is a wall quilt constructed of 24 individual quilt blocks or panels, which create an overall composition that's inspired by a historic quilt pattern. The fragmented pieces of text and visual imagery are then stitched together with collage, with some information remaining obscured or obstructed. Violent stitches and translucent layers of paint overlay some of the text. Powerful shapes crop historical and contemporary images. And the original pattern is inspired by the Great Wall of China, Russian constructivism, and the crazy quilts. And crazy quilts were really popular in the US in the 1800s. They celebrated the age of progress. And Great Firewall uses crazy quilts as a way to show disorder within the contained grid system. So what does Great Firewall represent? It represents the vast and systemic expansion of Chinese internet censorship in efforts to block internet access for its citizens. It is a modern example of a government controlling access to information. Yet this is really a human rights issue that's impacted many different people groups for many centuries. We use traditional media such as fabrics and threads, and non-traditional media such as papers, photographs, gold leaf, oil bar, and paint to piece together a wall quilt of monumental scale. As you can see, the information says it's about 13 feet high by 9 feet wide. So Great Firewall is a symbol of all walls and barriers preventing citizens from accessing information and from the freedom that comes with that information. Okay, so where did the concept for this piece come about? So Hai Hang, this is an image of Hai Hang, a painting I made. He's a former Wartburg International student of mine, and he was the impetus for this work. So he knew nothing of the 1989 Tiananmen Square protests and massacre until coming to the US for a college education. And this bothered him a lot. I was a student at the time, a young student, and I remember that being in the news all the time, Tiananmen Square. So he started to make drawings and paintings. This was a theme of his work, government censorship of this. And so within the Dictators and Dreamers series, which is, I created portraits, and Hai Heng's portrait and a portrait of the Chinese, former Chinese president Hu Jintao are included in that.
And so I vividly recall having conversations with Jennifer about her student Hai Heng, and this struck a chord with me. My background is in art and art history, but what you may not know is that I'm also a librarian. And so, of course, as a public librarian, this sparked all kinds of discussions or maybe rants on information access. One of the core values of librarianship is providing equitable information access, and the belief that an informed citizenry is the cornerstone of our democracy. The panel designs where I feel that our collaboration is most reflected is in the towers that you see on this slide. Knowing that one of our original visual sources of inspiration was China's Great Wall, which is very blocky and geometric. I created a thumbnail sketch of an alternative tower, which is quite the opposite. It's more swirling and organic. It references an image which, as an art, I didn't expect it to find its way into the final pattern. It was simply an exercise to consider other possibilities. However, Jennifer did see this idea as worthy to explore, and she created an alternative sketch inspired by the first, which was both angular and organic at the same time. It was the perfect solution. Likewise, she replicated the moody gradient from the thumbnail in paint on the final panel. So we both share the commonality of appreciating the inclusion of art historical references, something which you will also see in her Dictators and Dreamers series. I found myself working in Jennifer's preferred medium, which is collage, as I pieced together sections of the tower, and she sketched and painted something which maybe looks a little more similar to my aesthetic. While we worked on some of the other panel designs more independently, these panels in particular were developed in a back and forth process that truly reflects our collaborative partnership, and it happened very naturally and spontaneously. Our paths converge enough to form a successful working relationship, but diverge just enough that both of us are bringing different perspectives and techniques to the work. So when considering the idea of censorship and control of information, we experimented with ways to visually communicate this notion and developed several ways of doing so. The image in the bottom right corner of the screen is one of the 8 completed brick panels. Viewing this from a distance, it can appear as lines of redacted text which have been blocked out. At the same time, these sections have been modeled to appear as bricks, which is another form of impermeability. I also began experimenting with stitching over sections of the words and text as a way to obscure the info. As you can see in the example on the upper right, I wanted the stitches to appear somewhat large and tense and violent. At the same time, they almost took on an elegant quality and at times look like letter characters. It was a very visceral process. I really liked the results and I love the process.
So I'm just going to take a moment before we wrap up to just take one panel and kind of decode that. I know when we had like Lisa and Robin and Catherine came to the gallery and saw the piece, and as non-artists, they thought it would be helpful to kind of explain some of the imagery, some of the materials, the design. So the overall design of this quilt block, this is called Rodchenko 04. So we have 4 Rodchenko blocks, each one's different. The overall design of this is inspired by a Soviet political poster by Alexander Rodchenko. And so this was created before the death of Lenin in 1924. So it was really before like the censorship and repression of Stalin. And the work shows that the voice of the common person is powerful and important. So there's like this bullhorn coming out of the mouth of the person. So then there's this collaged imagery in the bullhorn. And or I'm calling it a bullhorn, that imagery is taken from contemporary newspapers. So these images are protesters that are asking for justice for Khashoggi, who was a Saudi Arabian journalist executed for writing articles critical. They were criticizing the Saudi Arabian royalty and government. And so there's evidence that the crown prince of Saudi Arabia actually ordered the hit. And so that's what's in the bullhorn. The gold leaf semicircle around the head serves two purposes. So one, it's used to create visual emphasis. And we actually have 4 of these blocks that would be put together, and the 4 semicircles create like a focal point for you within the quilt as a whole. But then also it gives kind of a halo-like quality to the figure, sharing the information. So the figure reads almost as like a saint found in religious iconography and in art history. So the truth or the information is kind of a holy experience. So that's decoding a single panel for you. Each panel has meaning.
And so a seed was planted while Jennifer was working on her Dictators and Dreamers series. We continue to have conversations about censorship and information, access and control. Sometimes it's an internet filter. Other times it takes the form of tanks rolling over students, protesters being run over by cars, journalists. This installation, which consists of 24 individual panels and stretches more than 13 feet high, is a visual representation of that conversation that we've been having over all of these years. So thank you for listening to our presentation on our project, The Great Firewall.
Thanks. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Lindsay and Jennifer. I'd like to open it up to see if there's a couple questions. We want to have a few minutes for questions after each one, see if there's any questions from the audience here.
We were just wondering where it was going to be displayed at.
Great question. So it actually was just on display at the Wartburg Gallery, Waldemar A. Schmidt Gallery at Wartburg College. It just came down in the end of February. It will be on display again up at the Clear Lake Art Center for the month of May. That art center is closed right now. They're going to reopen with this show. So there'll be the Dictators and Dreamers, and then the wall quilt, the Great Firewall will be a part of that. So Clear Lake Art Center is in Clear Lake, Iowa, April 27th through May 22nd. I could put that in the chat. Thanks for asking.
Yeah, no problem. It was awesome.
Thanks.
Thank you.
All right, thank you again. So I'll have us move